Count Dooku did not fall to the dark side because he craved chaos. He fell because he believed the Jedi Order had failed, and that something stronger needed to replace it. In Dooku's mind, the Sith were never meant to exist as parasites in the shadows, devouring one another under the rule of two. A system built on secrecy, fear, and eventual disposal. Dooku imagined something else entirely, a structure, a hierarchy, a disciplined order that mirrored the Jedi in form, but surpassed them in purpose and power. Where the Jedi Council had grown passive and indecisive, Dooku envisioned a Sith order that acted. Where the Jedi suppressed power, Dooku believed the Sith should cultivate it, not through endless betrayal, but through control, doctrine, and a strict hierarchy. In this future, Dooku did not see himself as an apprentice any longer. He believed the galaxy would be ruled by two pillars, Sidious as the Emperor, the political absolute, and Dooku as something unprecedented, a Sith Grand Master. The keeper of doctrine, the architect of a new Force tradition, a dark mirror of the Jedi Council, rebuilt under Sith principles. Even Anakin Skywalker had a place in this vision, not as Sidious's blunt instrument, but as a knight of a brand new order, a dark champion who would serve beneath Dooku's authority, enforcing Sith will just as Jedi Knights once enforced the Republic's peace. This belief is critical, because it explains why Count Dooku never behaved like a disposable apprentice would. Even as the Clone Wars wreathed worlds in flame, Dooku never stopped thinking like a Sith. While fleets clashed and armies burned worlds in his name, Dooku was quietly pursuing something far more dangerous than any military victory. Dooku was looking for a way out, a way to overthrow his master, a way to break the rule of two. And he pursued that future through 3 holocrons. Each holocron represented a phase of his long game: recruitment, knowledge, immortality. Together they formed a roadmap not just to usurp Palpatine, but to secure Dooku's place as the eventual ruler of the galaxy. This was Dooku's plan, and these were the 3 artifacts that he believed would make it a reality. But before the holocrons enlighten us, if you would like to dress like a dignified count rather than a raging brute, there's Sith-inspired merch available right now on the Star Wars merch page. Dark, refined designs worthy of a Dark Lord. Order before Christmas and use code WAVE for 15% off on top of 35% off site-wide. So basically half off. Link is in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for your support, and now, let us open today's holocron. Phase 1, the Nova Holocron. The first phase of Dooku's long game was not about overthrowing his master, it was about building leverage. The Sith Nova Holocron was not a repository of ancient wisdom or forgotten knowledge. It was a mechanism, a purpose-built instrument designed for a single, unsettling function: detection. Unlike Jedi methods that relied on trust, tradition, and voluntary surrender, the Nova Holocron was engineered to locate Force sensitives automatically. Not merely those who already existed in the galaxy, but those who had only just been born. If a Force sensitive entered the galaxy, the Nova would know. For Dooku, this was not an abstract tool. This was the beginning of infrastructure. The Nova offered something Sidious deliberately denied his apprentices, and that is autonomy. The ability to find, shape, and control Force wielders independently of the rule of two. This allowed Dooku to think in terms of networks rather than in a line of succession. This explains why during the Clone Wars, Dooku surrounded himself with more dark-side agents than any Sith apprentice in generations. Assassins, enforcers, and fallen Jedi. None of them were intended to replace him. They were proof of concept. The Nova Holocron was the scalable version of that new concept. It represented the earliest stage of a plan that did not rely on killing Sidious, at least not immediately. It relied on making himself irreplaceable first. If Dooku could control the discovery of Force wielders, he would control the future balance of power, regardless of who sat on the throne. And this phase was never about speed. The Clone Wars were designed to be short. Dooku knew this. The Nova Holocron was about what came after the war ended, when titles would solidify and roles would harden. It was the bet on the long term. Legends never confirms the ultimate fate of the Holocron. It vanishes from the record without explanation. But that absence matters, because it suggests a plan that was interrupted, not one that was discarded. The Nova Holocron marks the first moment when Dooku stopped behaving like an apprentice waiting for permission from a master. It marks when he began acting like someone preparing to outgrow Sidious. This was Phase 1. But now we reach Phase 2, the Dark Holocron. If the Nova Holocron represents leverage, the second phase was about something more dangerous: power. The Dark Holocron was not a single Sith Lord's teachings preserved for an heir. It was an archive, one of the earliest holocrons ever created in the lore, dating all the way back to the era of the 12 Dark Jedi. Some Jedi architects even hypothesized that it is before the era of the 12, something far older than maybe even the Sith tradition as a whole, or at least that's where the holocrons beginning stem. Dooku desired it because it held information long before the Rule of Two reshaped the Sith into a narrow, secretive lineage, a lineage that Dooku found himself a part of, but desired to dismantle. The Dark Holocron does not speak with a single voice. It contained the accumulated knowledge of multiple Sith across multiple eras, across histories, across rituals, philosophies, and even contradictions. It was a record of the Sith before they learned to starve their own apprentices of information and of power. To Dooku, this was invaluable. Sidious's greatest advantage was not raw strength, it was his depth. A lifetime spent digging deeper than anyone else, layer upon layer of knowledge, contingency, and preparation. Dooku understood this, and he understood something greater. He was not ready yet. The Dark Holocron was a rare moment of honesty in Dooku's ambition. He didn't believe himself equal to Sidious. He believed his master had gone further, learned more, and seen truths that he had not. And rather than rush into rebellion, Dooku sought to close that gap. This was not desperation, it was discipline and preparation. The holocron offered access to knowledge that existed outside of the Rule of Two entirely, teachings that predated Bane, rituals that were never meant to be shared between master and apprentice, ideas dangerous enough that the Jedi chose to lock them away rather than destroy them. To Dooku, this holocron was a vault of strategic weapons, not lightsabers or fleets, but of concepts, forgotten methods of power, alternate paths the Sith once walked before they confined themselves to a single, brittle system that Dooku wished to shatter. It is likely that this archive did more than simply empower Dooku. It gave him a map for a future. It gifted Dooku an understanding of Sith history broad enough to identify patterns, to trace where certain obsessions had led, to recognize and learn from names that had vanished from common Sith memory. And through that deeper understanding, Dooku accomplished something no Sith had done in centuries. The map was successful, and it led Dooku to an ancient evil that had been lost. Dooku found Darth Andeddu. This discovery alone suggests that the Dark Holocron was doing exactly what Dooku had desired. It was not making him reckless, it was making him dangerous in a quieter way, calculated, patient. A Sith who was no longer confined to the knowledge that his master allowed him to have. But this phase also reveals something worse. The more Dooku learned, the more certain he became that knowledge alone would save him. Sidious had survived for so long. He was the culmination of Bane's Rule of Two. Even ancient powers would fail against him. Even Dooku's overwhelming insight could be countered. This meant the final phase could not be about victory. To Dooku, the final phase needed to be about survival. Phase 3, the Holocron of Darth Andeddu. The final phase of Dooku's plan was not about power, it was a deeper refusal. By the time Dooku turned his attention to Andeddu's holocron, he had already accepted a brutal truth about the Sith. No matter how brilliant the apprentice, no matter how prepared the challenge, the Rule of Two was designed to end in a similar way, with one of them dead. And Dooku knew that if it came down to Sidious and himself, that his master would crush him. So Dooku searched for something the Rule of Two could not account for: death itself. Darth Andeddu was one of the earliest Sith obsessed with defying mortality. His teachings focused on essence transfer, spiritual persistence, and the ability to survive the destruction of one's physical body. Not resurrection in a Jedi sense, not harmony, but the Sith refusal to be erased, a continuation. Andeddu's holocron was not merely forbidden, it was dangerous even by Sith standards. Knowledge so destabilizing that it threatened the entire structure of Sith succession, because a Sith who could not truly die can never be replaced. This is why Dooku's possession of Andeddu's holocron matters more than any other artifact that he pursued. At this point, Dooku no longer planned to overthrow Sidious and take his place. He planned to make his own replacement impossible. If he could master Andeddu's teachings, he would not need to win once. He could lose and return. He could be killed and persist. The moment a Sith apprentice achieves that, the Rule of Two collapses, and that was Dooku's goal. There are signs that this knowledge was not theoretical either. Dooku gifted Quinlan Vos a red kyber crystal believed to have once belonged to Darth Andeddu himself. A crystal housed in his holocron. A deliberate choice, not merely a weapon, but a relic tied to a Sith Lord who had already walked the path that Dooku was now studying. It suggests that Andeddu's teachings were not locked away, but informing Dooku's actions. But this is where the plan collapses. Legends implies that Andeddu's holocron ultimately passed into Sidious's possession. Whether Dooku surrendered it under pressure, or Sidious seized it once he was dead, or became more aware of the danger, the result was the same. Dooku's safeguard was removed. The Dark Holocron was also believed to be claimed by Sidious, but the Nova Holocron vanished, and with that, Dooku's long game would collapse. Recruitment, knowledge, immortality. Each phase was sound, each step logical, and each one revealed how deeply Dooku understood the Sith. But he was still playing on a board that his master didn't merely control, but one that he had designed. Still though, Dooku's plan was brilliant. Recruitment, knowledge, and immortality. When viewed together, the holocrons reveal something far more disturbing than a failed coup. They reveal a blueprint not for a throne, but for ruling the galaxy. For permanence, Dooku was not preparing to rule for a lifetime. He was preparing to rule across many lifetimes. The Nova Holocron would have allowed him to identify and shape Force wielders from birth. Not dozens, hundreds, but perhaps thousands. An order of Sith as populous as the Jedi, but without debate, without dissent, without mercy. Structured, hierarchical, and absolute. The Dark Holocron gave him the depth to command them. Ancient doctrine, forgotten rituals, Sith history unfiltered by the rule of two. This would allow Dooku to determine what the Sith would ultimately be allowed to become, and Andeddu's holocron offered a final terror. A future where Dooku did not age out of power, where death was an inconvenience, where the Grand Master of the Sith endured by transferring his essence from vessel to vessel, shedding bodies as easily as he did titles. Not a charismatic ruler, not a beloved one, but an eternal administrator of the dark side, an ancient calculating presence presiding over generations of Sith who never truly surpassed him, because Dooku would never truly leave. A figure more akin to a living institution than a man. The Sith Order no longer driven by ambition, but frozen beneath the refined, unyielding will of its founder. This is what makes the question unsettling. What if Dooku had been given more time? What if Sidious had not uncovered these holocrons when he did? What if the Clone Wars had dragged on just a little longer? The Sith might not have inherited the galaxy through a single tyrant and a disposable apprentice. They may have inherited it through something worse. A Sith Order that would never collapse, a hierarchy that would never reset, and a Dark Lord who never truly died. Dooku would rule over a more structured order of Sith. He would eliminate the chaos that had plagued them for so long. He would make them dignified, powerful. The galaxy shaped by the power of a being who believes with a dignified frown that your existence means only to serve his will. And with that, thank you so much for watching and hanging out in the archives with me. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget there's Sith-inspired merch linked down below. Refined, dark side drip for those who prefer a Count's elegance over a Mad Emperor's cackle. And with that, I will leave you with this question. Would the galaxy actually have been worse under Dooku as a Sith Grand Master? An eternal, disciplined authoritarian? Or did Palpatine's chaotic hunger for control doom the galaxy far worse? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And until next time, may the Force be with you wherever your journey takes you next. Have a great day.